John Glenn is Financial Secretary to the Treasury, and he's a worried man. So what's he worried about? Well, the fact is, in the United Kingdom at the moment, the number of self-employeds has skyrocketed. We now have over 5 million people in business on their own account. That's up nearly 2.5 million over the last 10 years. And they're doing all sorts of different things. They're delivering pizzas, they're running small businesses, they're doing a very, very wide range of activities. But one thing they're not doing is saving for their retirement. And they're not just not doing it a bit, they're not doing it in droves. A recent survey published less than a month ago told us that less than 28% of all self-employed in the United Kingdom see pensions as relevant to themselves. That's a quarter of 5 million people. A lot of these individuals have become self-employed because of the shape of the economy at the moment. What we refer to as the gig economy is growing and growing rapidly, and that means they tend to be low earners. They are delivering food, they're driving Ubers, they're doing all sorts of stuff, which is fine, but isn't necessarily generating the kind of surplus income that the individuals require in order to make meaningful long-term savings contributions, whether that's to a pension or anything else for that matter. Just as hot a topic as whether they'll ever be able to save enough to buy a house. So what we have is a level of earnings which is more related to survival and today's bills than it is for any particular financial long-term architectural planning. The point about lower paid individuals making pension contributions is a very important one. Simply put, the earlier you start making contributions, the bigger your pension's going to be. It's that straightforward. And the lower paid people in the area of the economy that we have been discussing, let's broadly call it gig, but it's not always that way, tend to be younger. And encouraging someone of 23, 24, 25 years of age to start making pension contributions is massively important. Not only from the point of view of the fact that every pound invested at age 25 is going to be worth something like £500 by the time they get to age 55, but also that early stage discipline of understanding that taking responsibility for your welfare in retirement is absolutely, nowadays, the role of the individual, not of the state, and no longer of the employer. And of course, that's not relevant if you're self-employed. If this trend continues, we are storing up a significant and powerful demographic time bomb. The fact is, it's the job of government, the Financial Secretary of the Treasury being one, but all the way up to the Chancellor and the Prime Minister, to look ahead, to look over the curve and see where we're going in terms of the nation's future financial health. And having something like 3 million people arrive broadly simultaneously in 25 years' time at age 55 to 65 with nothing, with no pension assets, with no saving, simply means the state pension scheme, such as it will be in those days, will have to take the strain for all of that. That is a nightmare scenario. That's simply unsustainable. And therefore, the job of government at the moment is to look far enough forward to be able to steer this off, head this off at the pass, and make sure that self-employeds are both encouraged, coerced, pushed, and motivated into making appropriate provision for their own long-term financial stability. So who can we blame? The short answer is it's a mix of circumstances, policy, and some short-sightedness. The savings ratio across the whole of the UK has reduced. So this isn't just about self-employeds. And the way that the government responded to the long-term savings ratio reducing in the employed sector was to introduce auto-enrolment, and it's been very successful. The fact is that there are millions of people now saving into a pension scheme at a low earnings rate, which is supported by contributions from their employers and contributions for the government. And so for every pound they're putting in general, they're getting £3 or £4 worth of saving. And that's not a very difficult, it's not a tough sell to say to anyone, even a 25-year-old who's much more interested in booking his next holiday to Ibiza, will understand that getting £4 back for every pound they put in is a pretty good deal. So take up on auto-enrolment has been strong, it's been successful, and it can be a model for resolving these situations. So in terms of blaming, there's a good example of where action has been taken and the problem has been identified and managed. Within the self-employed sector, of course, blame's a different thing. Michelle Cracknell, who is head of the Pensions Advisory Service, cites a complete lack of engagement between self-employed individuals and their pension pots. And I think she's absolutely right. Michelle identified the fact that no one is now selling the benefit of pensions to self-employed individuals. So what can be done? Let's look at the scale of the problem to start with, not from the overall numbers, but from proportionality. We are dealing with something which is, this isn't a minor problem. Between 2007 and 2016, the amount of individuals, self-employed individuals saving for a pension halved. Halved. Not a statistical blip, they halved. That's crazy. The first thing that says is they simply don't see pensions as relevant, they don't trust or understand them, and they don't feel that they can deliver financial security. That has to be a problem of messaging. So let's start with messaging. There is still this pervasive, old-fashioned view that you start putting money into a pension, you can't do anything with it until you're age 55, you have to keep putting the same amount or more in, it's deeply inflexible, you can't take holidays and breaks, all of which is nonsense. How have we as an industry failed to get across to potential savers that these are actually highly attractive, highly tax incentivized, highly flexible, exceptionally useful long-term savings vehicles? But failed we have. The perception of pensions remains boring, dull, inflexible, remote, out of touch, and cloaked in jargon. As a result, anyone really under the age of 40 is probably highly uninterested in general in the concept. And by the time you hit 45, it's probably too late. So where does failure number one lie? It lies with the industry. How do we resolve that? We get our messaging better. The reality is, for all of these people, poverty in old age is no fun. It's not a joke. And kicking it down the line, failing to address the issues of a necessity to save can have really awful consequences. One of my favorite messages of all time in terms of bringing home the reality of failing to save for your old age was the example of the Australian government several years ago, who introduced their own version of auto-enrolment. And rather than the UK's version of the auto-enrolment television adverts, which featured a large bouncy monster thing, which I don't think anyone really understood why or what. It was like, don't ignore the monster in the room, but probably a little bit subtle. The Australians, bless them, in their normal, wonderfully blunt and forthright way, featured a series of TV adverts starring an old individual opening a can of dog food, then getting a spoon out and proceeding to eat the can of dog food. And the voiceover was fairly straightforward. If you don't join the pension scheme that we're suggesting you join, this will be you in old age. You will be eating dog food. Your call. It's up to you. Take it seriously or eat dog food. Now I've got to say, we might find that a bit distasteful in this country, but boy, did it work. They had a 100% take-up rate. So I think linking actions to consequences, let's do it. There is a proposed technology solution to all this as well. I never feel that technology on its own is a solution. So let's be clear on this. I have, in the various articles I've written on all sorts of subjects relating to resolving systemic problems, whether that be access to finance for small business or pension saving or whatever, I've felt that the go-to solution whenever these things go through a government committee is we need technology. What we need is a website. Now, these things are useful, but they don't solve it in its own right. So let's get that out there straight away. I don't think there is a single silver bullet. Nonetheless, technology can play a part in this. The simple, very sensible idea that the aforementioned John Glenn is working on with the pensions industry. They've titled it a tech sprint, which simply means they're building a website. But nonetheless, a pensions dashboard where an individual, in this case a self-employed individual, can see not only what they are currently contributing to, but any pensions they've previously had, and what these things collectively might add up to in terms of retirement income, and hopefully, if this is good quality technology, what more they need to do by way of contribution and by way of fund choice and that sort of thing in order to hit the goals that they aspire to. If that piece of tech can be delivered, and it's pretty mind-boggling actually having to draw together every possible pension scheme in the country and get them to deliver real-time information about projected values, current values, transfer values, all that sort of thing. It's a sort of nirvana for advisors, but with the exception of one or two very specialist bits of technology that exist within advisory businesses, there's nothing like it out there at the moment. Nonetheless, the pensions industry and John Glenn's department, the Treasury, have decided they're going to work together to deliver this. So I think that will be a significant plank in dealing with this problem, but it will not on its own resolve it. The self-employed, of course, by definition, don't have an employer. Therefore, the one thing that you can't do is draw parallels between the success of auto-enrolment, where the employer of all these individuals effectively acts as an unpaid premium collector and administrator of the scheme at that level. That function doesn't exist within the millions and millions of self-employed. And that's one of the key problems to this issue, is how do we create a unified and comprehensive premium or contribution collection solution. There are a number of possible solutions, but none of them seem to really work very well because they always rely on the various different private sector providers, the insurance companies, to interact directly with the self-employed individual that is making those pension contributions. The problem with that is then you have a very, very fractured delivery of this solution. We have a proposal to set the mood music. We have the proposal to create the technology to support it. But ultimately, this needs administering. And administering with 5 million different people all running their own businesses is going to be a headache. The law requires that if you are an employer, you act as an administrator for the auto-enrolment scheme for your employed staff. That is not true of the self-employed. There is no such agency. There might be a solution, however. The one government agency that touches every single self-employed person in this country is HMRC. They already collect a form of pension contribution called national insurance contributions. I would suggest it may work well to have HMRC acting as the collector of both regular and individual contributions as agent, not as part of a government investment program, because we all know what happens when the government get their hands on investment programs, they spend the money. Simply acting as agent and remitting those contributions onward to the auto-enrolment pension providers. I think that would give the self-employed a great deal of confidence. It would also be a logical and elegant solution that would not cost the taxpayer a great deal of money. So from my point of view, the last part of this rather tangled web of complication is to include HMRC as collection agents for a formal auto-enrolment program for the self-employed. If you put those three proposals together, the technology, the mood music, and the means of making and collecting contributions, I think you'll have a massive impact in the state of self-employed savings in the UK as we speak.